Welcome, everyone. Wow, it's already June. I don't know where the time has gone. I think we've all been very busy enjoying spring migration and hopefully doing all kinds of atlasing and documentation of birds in the last few weeks. So before we get started with tonight's presentation, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. I'm currently on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, composed of the Ojibwa, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. Specifically, this is the home of Caldwell First Nation and part of the House of Walpole Island First Nation. We acknowledge caregivers of this land and all the moccasins that have traveled it over time. So you may wonder why we're all here together tonight. Well, there's kind of two things on our agenda this evening. Kaylin and Mike have some housekeeping items, just some things we need to be aware of for atlasing at this time of the year. And then, of course, we all want to know how Ontario can win the Big Atlas Weekend, which is coming up in just a few days. So I'm going to pass things over to Kaylin and Mike and let them tell us and share all their wisdom.
All right, cool. Thanks, Sarah, and welcome everybody. Welcome everybody who's on Zoom, but also anybody who's joining us on Facebook. I'm just going to get into some slides because Kaylin and I have some slides to show you. And so just kind of go over what we're going to do. We're going to do a little presentation, talk about some of the things to remind you of this time of year. It's a very exciting time of year for all of us at the Atlas, and hopefully for you too. And then we're going to talk about how to win the Big Atlas Weekend, both how Ontario can win it, but also how you can win some prizes yourself. And then we'll, as usual, have time at the end for questions related to what we've talked about or anything else you might be wondering about related to atlasing this night. So let me get my slides up. Okay. So yeah, we're talking about June atlasing and the Big Atlas Weekend. And if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A on Zoom. If you're having any issues, you can use the chat. And then on Facebook, you can use the comments to ask questions as well. We're monitoring that. So welcome to peak season. We are in the thick of peak season, right in the middle. Southern Ontario, our peak season is May 24th to July 10th. And in Northern Ontario, it is June 1st to July 10th. And peak season is extremely important for us. This is our peak time of year when the very most number of species are exhibiting breeding behavior right now. And this is the time of year when we want to get as many hours out across the province surveying for the Atlas to look for that breeding evidence. So just a reminder at this time of year, what it is we're actually trying to accomplish when we're talking about our coverage goals. So we are looking at getting 20 hours of atlasing during this peak season and 25 point counts in a square to consider it adequately covered. Now, of course, we can go well beyond that to get excellent coverage, but we're aiming for adequate coverage in 100% of our squares in that dark green area, Southern Ontario, basically south of Sault Ste. Marie and North Bay. And then that middle band, we're aiming for 5% of squares to get that adequate coverage. And then in the extreme north of where we have any roads, basically, we're aiming for 2% of squares to get covered. So that is a lot of squares we're trying to get covered over the course of the 5 years of the Atlas. And of course, we're in the very middle of our Atlas project. We are halfway through season 3. So of course, there's optional special surveys as well, and you can go well beyond those 20 hours and those 25 point counts if you'd like. So I'm going to just talk about some of the things you can do over the next few weeks during the remainder of this peak season. So the very easiest thing you can be doing is general atlasing out in the field. This is a photo of some of our summer crews that were out training earlier before peak season started. But general atlasing is really just going out and looking and listening for birds and recording the breeding evidence. So this is AKA going birding. The only real difference from regular birding is you're looking for and recording that breeding evidence. So could be something as simple as a bird in suitable breeding habitat. That's pretty much everything that you might encounter this time of year. Could be singing birds in suitable breeding habitat, or something higher evidence like a bird carrying food for young, or a nest with young in it, or a nest with eggs, something like that. So get out any chance you can and look, listen, and record what you're seeing into the atlas. We're hoping that people can target a combination of the different habitats and parts of every square. So what we don't want is everybody going to one tiny little spot within a square and getting 100 hours in that one spot, but missing all the other stuff that might be found in other parts of that square. And just as a reminder, we're aiming for 20 hours per square. That's sort of our minimum goal. It's okay to do more, but if you can spread the wealth out kind of thing, that's even better for us all. You can get a little more involved if you want to do point counts. So you can do these in person if your bird identification skill is high enough with sound and sight. If you can identify most of the birds that you see and hear in an area, then you could do in person. But if you're not quite at that level yet, you can do digital point counts, like in this photo here, using one of the Atlas's Zoom handheld recorders. You can put them on a little tripod or a bigger tripod like here. If you're interested in doing any of these point counts, please talk to your regional coordinator first, because they'll be able to tell you where your help is most needed. What we don't want to end up with is more than one person going out and doing point counts at the same place and doubling up in one spot and then missing out on another square. So those point counts are 5 minutes long. They're at random roadside locations, and then we're hoping for 5 off-road locations within mostly in forests, if you can get access to a place that's off-road as well. So again, talk to your RC if you're interested in doing point counts. Your help would be greatly appreciated, and virtually every region still needs help with point counts, except maybe Peterborough and Toronto and Waterloo, and maybe Ottawa as well. So if you're wondering how to contact your RC, right on our Atlas website, under the Get Involved menu, there's a Contact Us button. That takes you to this page, which lists all the different regions and the email address to contact them. There's also a map that can show you what region you might be in. If you're not sure which region it is based on the list, you can go to the map. And on the map, if you click on it, you'll get the same information, the email address. So very easy to find your regional coordinator. And please contact them if you want to get really involved in doing things like point counts. There's also lots of special surveys to be done at this time of year if you're interested. The 3 surveys that are going on now or coming up are the marsh birds, the nightjar survey, and then the long-eared owl survey. So the first 2, marsh birds and nightjars, those are running right now. The long-eared owl doesn't start until the start of July. These are done different times of the day. So the marsh birds you can do in the morning or in the evening. The nightjars you have to do in the evening, sort of a little before dark, and then it goes into the night, and then long-eared owl starts after sunset. The first one, marsh birds, you really do need to know your bird sounds very well. You need to be able to identify basically everything you can hear. So that's not necessarily something that everybody can do, which is fine. The other 2 surveys, the nightjars and the long-eared owls, those ones are really suitable for people of all skill. You just need to know how to identify 1 or 2 target species, and we have great resources on the website to help you get ready for that. The other thing to note is that marsh bird survey does require you to use a playback device. So a little portable speaker does the trick, and RCs have some of those out available for loan as well, if you're interested. So again, just like the point counts, please contact your regional coordinator before you go out and do any of these special surveys, because again, we don't want to end up with 2 surveys being done at one spot, and then the second location missing out because two people did the same spot the first time. So we want to make sure we get adequate coverage everywhere, not just a lot of coverage in one spot. So in order to kind of target your efforts, especially with the big Atlas weekend coming up and the June and July challenge, which I'm going to talk about shortly, it's very handy to go check out the Atlas coverage map. So you find that on our website, again, under the tools and resources menu, and you click on coverage map. And that takes you to this screen, and you can choose from that left drop-down menu the different layers. And one of the ones that's really handy to check out to see how the different squares around you are doing, you can click on something like number of species. And then in this example, I've clicked show square assignments, so you can see which squares are assigned to a principal atlaser. And I also have the show atlas regions checkbox checked just to make it a little easier to navigate. And then when you click that update map button in the top right, it's going to load up a map that looks something like this. So this is our map showing our the number of hours during peak period. And so you can see a lot of places kind of around the Muskokas, the Greater Toronto area, Waterloo, Guelph, Kingston, Ottawa, Peterborough. You know, a lot of those areas are doing quite well. All those dark brown, dark orange squares, those are all squares that have over 20 hours already during the peak period. So those ones have what we consider adequate coverage as far as hours. So you could use the map to target that, okay, well, there's maybe some squares if you're in Peterborough in the northern part of the region that need some help getting those hours. So this is a good way to plan your effort if you're looking to make the biggest impact. If you zoom in closer, you can click on an individual square, and that will show you a bunch of stats related to that particular square. And what's really handy to know for some of these challenges that we have coming up are the number of species and information about what breeding evidence has been recorded for those different species. So you can look at the information here, but it's really handy to click on that that square Atlas square number that's in blue. That will take you to the square summary sheet, which gives you a whole bunch more information. I'm going to show you that square summary sheet now. So this is the top of the square summary sheet. It's got a bunch of stats up at the top that tells us how many hours, how many species, things like that. But what I wanted to focus in on here was our species list. So this one is showing you the previous column, shows you what the previous Atlas results were for that square. So in the Canada goose, the first species, the Atlas 2 recorded fledged young, so that's about as high as you can get. And Atlas 3, which is the code column, also is fledged young. So we're doing well for that species. But if you go down, you can start finding species that were recorded in Atlas 2, like blue-winged teal, with the pair code. And there's no code for the code column, so no code for Atlas 3. And so that's a species that was recorded there last Atlas, but not yet this Atlas. So it might be a species that could yet to be found. Now, this is all very important because of some of the challenges we have coming up. So I'm going to quick tell you about some of those, and then I'll pass it on to Kaylin. So our June challenge and our July challenge as well, both months, we're challenging you to try to get out and cover some of these squares that don't have really excellent coverage yet, or maybe missing species, or have species that need upgrading in their breeding evidence still. So every time you do that, every time you upgrade the breeding evidence for a particular species in a particular square, you get entered into the June challenge draw. And then once the calendar flips to July, we'll have a separate one for July. So every entry you get gets you a chance to win a pair of Vortex Diamondback binoculars. So pretty fun challenge that we've got. And it really is something that we're hoping to get people to have a good reason to go out and go to places that maybe don't have a lot of coverage yet, or have a lot of species that haven't been recorded yet, or species that need upgrading. So if there's lots of species that have H codes or S codes, habitat or singing bird, if you can upgrade those to something higher, like a pair or a territory, or even something like a nest with eggs, if you upgrade those, you get an entry into the June challenge. And then again, next month, you'll get an entry into the July challenge. So please do participate in that. We look forward to giving away a couple pairs of binoculars to our lucky winners. So just to sort of recap some of the things that I've talked about, there's lots of ways that you can be helping this time of year. They're all excellent ways to help. So one way you can help is make sure you're registered. If you're not, please go register, and then just make atlasing part of your birding. If you're going out birding anywhere in the province, doesn't have to be a square that you've signed up for. If you're going out birding, then please record what you're seeing and the breeding evidence and put it into the atlas. If you want to go another step up, use that coverage map to plan where you're going to go on your little birding trips, or maybe big birding trips, and head for those under-surveyed places, and get that data into the atlas. That's a good way to get entered into our June and July challenges for sure. If you want to go the next step up, make sure you go talk to your RC and tell them that you're interested in helping with special surveys or point counts where they need help in their region, or maybe you have a cottage, or you're planning on a camping trip or something into central Ontario or further north, in which case it'd be great if you can connect with the RC in those areas and help out wherever you can. And then of course, the best way that you can help the atlas is to become a principal atlaser. If there's squares near you or even further afield that you can take on and become the principal atlaser, that would be extremely helpful. And by doing that, you're committing to get those 20 hours in. And remember, it doesn't have to be all this year. We've got 2 more seasons left. But if you can get those, commit to doing those 20 hours and getting those point counts done, that would be absolutely super. The last thing I'm going to say before I pass things over to Kaylin is I'm sure a lot of you are already involved. We've got our quick start guide up on the website and circulating in social media now, trying to get people who haven't yet registered to start up with the atlas. And so if this is you, please follow the quick start guide to get going. It's very simple to get started. And if it's not you, but maybe you know some birder friends that you think could be a good help to the atlas, then please pass on the quick start guide to them, or take them out atlasing and show them how fun it can be. So that's what I have to say. I'm going to pass things over to Kaylin, who is going to talk about a really exciting event that's coming up this weekend that we're taking part in, and we hope you all will take part in as well.
Great, thanks, Mike. Okay, so many of you, or some of you, might be here because you wanted to know how to win the Big Atlas Weekend. But some of you might also be here just for the June tips that Mike was providing. And so I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to the Big Atlas Weekend. So the Big Atlas Weekend is a friendly competition between atlasers and amongst atlas projects to raise awareness and collect data for breeding birds. So essentially, the Big Atlas Weekend is kind of 2 parts, and they both involve challenges. The first part is an intra-atlas competition. So that's just between atlasers of a single project, where there are different challenges that you can compete in that all involve atlasing, of course, for prizes. And then the second part is atlasers of projects competing in those same challenges, but seeing who can do the most atlasing between different projects. So the projects that are competing this year in the inter-atlas competition are Ontario, Maryland, DC, New York, Newfoundland, North Carolina, and Puerto Rico. So there's a few different events that are kind of involved with the Big Atlas Weekend. The first one is tomorrow, and it's the kickoff event. It's happening at 6 p.m. Eastern time. And there's going to be kickoff, but there's also going to be trivia. So we're going to do breakout rooms where you can talk to Atlasers from other Atlas projects, so from other states or provinces, and discuss your answers. And then there's a chance for some prizes on that. And then June 23rd to 25th is the actual Big Atlas weekend. So it starts at 6 p.m. on Friday and goes until 11:59 on Sunday. And that's when you can do all of your atlasing and try to win prizes or try to help the Ontario Atlas kind of win the Big Atlas weekend in our competition with the other projects. And then finally, next Wednesday at 6 p.m., there's going to be an awards ceremony. So each of the atlases is going to present their winners for each of the categories, which I'll explain in a minute. And then we'll also find out who wins the Big Atlas weekend out of the different projects that are involved. So next slide. All right, so here's the challenges. It does look a little bit jumbled there, or like a little bit small, but I'll go through them anyways. So the first challenge is the species with breeding evidence reported that are either new or upgraded for the square. So Mike was talking about this a little bit earlier and kind of hinted that the square summary sheet might be helpful in helping you win the Big Atlas weekend or the June challenge. So if you take a look at the square summary sheets, you can either find species that don't have any breeding evidence yet, or that have a low level of breeding evidence. So like the H for habitat or S for singing is a low level of breeding evidence, and you can upgrade those fairly easily. So yeah, make sure that you take a look at those square summary sheets, and you can either go to a square that doesn't have very many species reported yet, or you can go to another square and try your best to upgrade breeding evidence if you can. The second challenge, or challenge here is a complete Atlas checklist with nocturnal effort. So a nocturnal checklist is 20 minutes after sunset to 40 minutes before sunrise. And so if you do that, you'll be in the running for a prize that I'll talk about just in a minute from now. The third challenge is a complete Atlas checklist in a square with less than 20 hours of atlasing in the peak season. So as Mike mentioned, the peak season is May 24th to July 10th, or June 1st to July 10th and 4th. And so Mike also showed you guys how to access the coverage map in order to see how much effort has been put into each square. And one thing that I should mention is that you could actually kind of check off 2 of these or more with the same checklist. So if you went to a square that had less than 20 hours of atlasing in the peak season, you could find species that don't have breeding evidence yet and add breeding evidence for those species. So you can do kind of combination checklists here. If it's a nocturnal checklist that you're adding new species in a square with less than 20 hours, then all the better. And so our last challenge is a social media post with Atlas related photos on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and making sure that you tag the Atlas. You can see our social media handles there. Make sure that your post is public, otherwise we won't be able to see it if we're not friends with you on social media. And then finally, we're going to be crowning a most valuable Atlaser. And so this will be the Atlaser who completes the most of the above challenges. So submits the most checklists with nocturnal effort, the most checklists that have species with newer upgraded breeding evidence, and the most checklists with 20 more hours of atlasing the peak season, and then the social media piece as well. And so what are the prizes for all of this? I guess we'll go to the next slide. So the prizes are Cornell Lab Bird Academy course for anyone who wins the individual Atlaser challenges. So if you win this the challenge for species with upgraded breeding evidence, then you'll win a free course to the Cornell Lab Bird Academy. The most valuable Atlaser will win a pair of binoculars. And then the Inter-Atlas Challenge, whichever project wins the Big Atlas weekend will get bragging rights, and will also get the Canary Cup, which is actually a real trophy. And so the project, essentially a project wins by having the most Atlasers competing in Big Atlas weekend, and completing these challenges. So the more of you that complete these challenges, the better chance we have at winning the Canary Cup, and the better chance you have at winning one of the prizes, either the Bird Academy courses or the binoculars. So I think that's it. I think that's probably my last slide about the Big Atlas weekend. Yep. Okay. We'll move on to questions.
All right. Well, I'm already plotting what I'm going to put in. I'm lucky I've got a cave swallow colony on my building, so I'm going to get that all documented up. All right. So we do have a couple questions. I think most of our questions right now relate to what Mike was talking about earlier. So we had Dean Post saying that they noted that a few of their digital point counts from last year are not logged on the website. Should we be notifying the Atlas or RC, or just assume that there were errors with these recordings?
Yeah, that's a good question. We haven't sent out, we're planning on sending out an email to all the folks who did those digital recordings with a link to all their recordings that we have. And so when we do that, if there's some missing, then yeah, definitely let us know. We'll be asking you that in that email we send out to all the people who did that. It's possible they didn't get in time for the analysis last year. There's a few possibilities. Hopefully it's one of the simpler ones, but yeah, I guess for now hold tight a little longer. And hope, but you can send us a message now if you want, if you know the details of the one that you think's missing. But yeah, we'll be sending out sort of a summary to all the people who have helped out with those digital point counts already.
All right. We have another question in the chat is what if I have entered sightings in eBird? Do I enter my sightings in both apps? Yeah,
good question. The eBird, we don't pull stuff from eBird automatically. There's a few reasons for that. One, we don't know if you were traveling between Atlas squares, for instance, and there's some extra details that we might ask from you for certain species that eBird's not going to ask you for, and we are also asking for things like pinning locations of rare species. So we do need you to get the data into the Atlas. There's some easy ways to do that. There's a website on our, I don't know, Kaylin, if you can pull the eBird page up and put it in the chat. It kind of goes through all the details, but you can import a checklist straight from eBird. Go to the Atlas and click on submit. There's an option to import the checklist. We need you to do that one checklist at a time, unfortunately. That's just because we need you to fill in that extra information that I mentioned and confirm that you didn't cross boundaries. The absolute easiest way is it's not going to help you for this checklist you've already done, but for future checklists, you can set it up in your Nature Counts account, your Atlas account, to automatically send your Atlas records to eBird, because everything we do is more than eBird asks for. So that's what I do, for instance. I've got my accounts linked, and then so everything I submit to the Atlas automatically goes into eBird as well. So it prevents me from having to do things twice, and works really well. So Kaylin put in the eBird and the Atlas webpage there that kind of talks through the different scenarios and what's the best way to do it. But hopefully it's not too much for you to get those records into the Atlas, because we would really appreciate that extra data.
Okay, so we have another question. Is it okay to do a point count when there's not a number provided on the map?
Yeah, so you're creating a new point count location essentially. If I'm interpreting that question correctly. Yeah, absolutely, that's okay. In fact, we do want you to create some new point count stations, especially off-road. If you look at the square map that we provide for each square, there's a little sort of target number of off-road point counts in which habitats we want you to put them in. But if you're just doing a random place, it's okay to do it as a point count. There's nothing wrong with that. Just it's not as high of a priority as getting those predetermined point count stations completed.
All right, and then we have another question. What should I think if I see my RC doing point counts in my square when my square has more than 20 hours already logged?
What should you think? Well, maybe there's still point counts to be done, or maybe they just want to do some extra point counts. The 20 hours, right? If you've got 20 hours, but maybe you didn't have the point counts completed yet, I'm not sure. It's probably a better question for your RC. It probably doesn't say anything about you or what your RC thinks of you, that's for sure.
All right, and we have a question about the Big Atlas weekend. When does the data need to be submitted in order to count towards the challenges?
Yeah, I can answer this one. For the Big Atlas weekend, your data needs to be submitted by noon on the Monday, but the data needs to actually have been, the data collection needs to have been done between 6 p.m. on Friday, this upcoming Friday, and 11:59 p.m. on Sunday. But in terms of like actually getting your data in, you'll have until noon on Monday.
Excellent. Someone's asking if you can expand on the nocturnal surveys. Are you referring to the nightjar survey, owl survey during safe dates, or just general atlasing after dark?
I'm going to go ahead and assume this is for the Big Atlas weekend. So nocturnal surveys, it can be any of those. So if you do a nightjar survey, it will count towards the Big Atlas weekend. But just doing any atlasing after dark is totally acceptable too. So either one of those will count towards the Big Atlas weekend, and you can choose whichever works for you.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to sort of add to that, the reason we're trying to get you to we're trying to encourage people to do that is there are species like nightjars and owls that you're not going to get if you're just going out during the day, and we do want to get a little bit of nocturnal coverage in every square, not necessarily one of those special surveys, but just get some coverage in the nocturnal period to try to survey for those birds that are more active at night. So that's kind of the thinking behind the challenge and why we're trying to get you to have an extra reason and reward to get out at a time that sometimes we're just sleeping.
Yeah. All right, we have another question here. For some species, especially if I've updated breeding evidence in a square, I've been uploading audio files onto the eBird list after Nature Count automatically creates the eBird list. Is this a useful thing to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something we encourage. If you've got audio or photo documentation, especially for those rare species, it's really helpful. Even in your Atlas checklist to make a note that you've got that and that you're going to put it in your eBird checklist. Because it's very useful for the RCs when they do the regional review, and then the provincial reviewers when they do their review. If there's that documentation, it speeds up the process for sure.
Right. And we had a thank you for helping clarify about the eBird Nature Counts connection. So they appreciated that. So you hit the nail on the head with that one, Mike.
Good. Yeah, it's pretty nice, the system now, to be able to set it up in your profile in the Atlas, and then you can just sort of set it and forget it and just use nature counts, and you're away to the races.
Excellent. All right. Let's see. I guess we're almost through here, unless anyone else has any other questions or burning, you know.
I got a question offline actually that I'll answer here,
Okay.
because it relates to those coverage maps and things. So I keep getting asked how often and this is really important for planning, if you really want to plan your Big Atlas weekend and be as productive as possible for hitting those targets, is how often do those different outputs update. So the square summary and the coverage map, they both update once a day. It's usually late in the afternoon. So the square summary sheet actually tells you when it was last updated on the very bottom. But those are useful to check if you really want to get hardcore into your planning and optimizing your strategy for this weekend.
All right. Do you have another question? This is someone who's having trouble accessing Indigenous land on their square. They've called and left messages, but they haven't ever heard back from the First Nation involved. I have on a few occasions walked in to do some quick counts, but I feel like I'm trespassing. I've never had a problem, but what has the Atlas done with regard to contacting First Nations?
You
Okay, so
want
this
to get
one-
that,
yeah.
Galen?
No, that's totally fine. Yeah. So don't access them. Don't go onto Indigenous lands unless we have explicit kind of permission to do so. That would be my #1 guidance. The Atlas has reached out to Indigenous communities to invite them to participate in the Atlas and to try to build some connections there. But until we have a formal invitation to access their lands, then we are not going to be doing so. So I would just stay off of those, stay out. And, you know, if we end up kind of not collecting data in those places, then that may be the case, but we're still working on those connections and we still got a few years left. So might just wait and see where we go with that. Okay.
All right. Well, let's see if we get any other questions just before we log off here.
Everybody's ready for bed. Going to bed early so you can get up early for point counts and atlasing tomorrow, right?
Absolutely, Mike. That's exactly what everyone's doing.
Yeah. Out on a patio somewhere, and it sounds more like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's good. And just remember, you can always join the Atlas discussion forum under the Get Involved tab. That's a great place to go if you have questions between Sappy hours. We got a great community of other Atlasers. Kaylin and I answer questions when we can, but we're pretty busy these days. So it's great place to hear from other Atlasers if you have questions.
All right. Well, we do have a good question, and this one I think we probably all have some opinions on. How does the Atlas feel about the use of Merlin?
Merlin. Yeah. So Merlin is an amazing tool to help you learn your birds and help you find birds that you might have otherwise been missing. It is not a replacement for humans. It does make mistakes, and it's not telling you with 100% certainty every time it detects something, right? So if you keep those things in mind and you use it as a tool to help you, it's a very excellent tool to help with atlasing. But it's not a replacement, and you shouldn't be reporting everything that Merlin tells you. You shouldn't put that into an Atlas checklist. You should take it as a suggestion that species might be there, and you need to get out and confirm that species yourself, either visually or by sound. It's really an amazing tool and gets most things right. Some of the things it has the hardest time with are things like vireos. Has a really hard time with Philadelphia versus red-eyed vireo, for instance. And it also has a hard time with, not surprisingly, birds that mimic other birds. So starlings and catbirds and yellow-breasted chats and thrashers and things like that. So those ones especially you need to think really hard about, but always take a suggestion from Merlin as a suggestion, not written in stone.
Yeah. And what I like about the song feature too is that once you've been recording for a little bit, once that song comes up again, it gets highlighted in the list. So if it's something you're not familiar with and Merlin's suggesting it's something that you've maybe never seen there before, you weren't anticipating, then that's every time it sings, that's maybe a good way to try and figure out where the bird is and try and get eyes on it too. Because I like to test Merlin all the time, and it's right a lot of the time, but you know, it thinks there's all kinds of hairy woodpeckers at Point Gilead, which we know that's not the case. So
yeah, no, it's really good. It's right way more than it is wrong, but it's not right all the time, and we want humans to go out and find these birds, not just a computer. So
absolutely. They said that they never considered a bird when using Merlin. Bird was only heard once or twice in a 3-minute recording. So
yeah, and the other thing is if you hear and Merlin detects something unusual, you can take the audio recording from Merlin and save that and you could send it to your RC, or you could post it on like the Atlas discussion forum, or there's a million other ID discussion forums out there, and you could get some feedback. And if people feel like that's really what it is, then maybe you can go back and try to find it again a second time.
Excellent. All right.
Okay, well,
I think this is it. I think it's now, this is really it this time.
Thanks again, everyone, so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And hopefully all of you will be participating this upcoming weekend for the Big Atlas weekend, and chance to win some good prizes. And I guess we'll be seeing you next time.
All
yeah,
right.
good luck, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.